So this one is very hard to review at many different levels because they got so many things right that the few things that were not good were a little distracting, but probably the most surprising thing, and people may think I'm making this up or I'm seeing things, but no, there's a very, very strong Tolkien element. And I want to be clear, it's a Tolkien element, not a Peter Jackson element. There is some Peter Jackson, there is some Spielberg, of course, but it was a very interesting merger of different styles that usually don't go together, and when they are put together, they're not good. They're not good at all. Like the Hobbit trilogy is really, really terrible. This is not that. So it's not as great as the first animated version of Transformers. It is aimed at a very young general audience, so it's more for like a passive, moderate fan of Transformers. If you're a diehard purist of the early stuff, as I am, you'll not be satisfied. But again, I was satisfied because I think for what they were trying to do, they did it very well. My only major complaints would be two. One is that the comedy was overdone. They could have shaved off a few minutes, especially at the beginning, and gotten to the main story much quicker. But there we go. It's Lord of the Rings again, right? The beginning takes a while for the story to pick up. More with Optimus and Mirage with certain characters. I'll just leave it there. That if they interacted with certain characters a lot more, I think the story would have benefited by a lot. But for what this is, which is kind of merging Lord of the Rings, Indiana Jones, Spielberg films with a more serious modern mythology, yeah, this was pretty strong. This was a very strong film. The basic core is very solid. You do have a few quibbles, because I think lazy people will say there are plot holes. No, I think they answered the plot holes. And this is not a spoiler review, but I think the way they got out of it was by a certain big twist at the end, which a lot of people like. I thought the twist was fine, but the twist didn't make the film or break the film. So what is the film? Well, basically, it's a very simple. Transformers need to get a key to help them, and of course, the bad guys want the key, so they're fighting for a key, and the humans get involved, and that's the basic gist of the story. And in terms of what we should care about, it's whether certain protagonists will meet a challenge and overcome the challenge. This is aimed for a young audience. Of course, we know they're going to overcome the challenge, but I think the way they got there was very, very pleasing. The interactions with the humans and Autobots wasn't as cringy as I feared. It was actually flowing, for the most part, fairly naturally. The motivations were spelled out very explicitly, and everything was tied back together. My only real major issue is this is a very safe film. So the twists were done fairly well. I usually can predict a film nowadays like 90% of the time. I was genuinely surprised. Like, they did things I was surprised. Like, oh, they're going to do this? No, they don't do that. They do this instead. I'm like, oh, okay, that was interesting. And yes, canonically, what they're calling Unicron a dark god doesn't sit right with me, but it's like, okay, it's not what he is, but fine, so be it. But I think overall, I was very, very pleased. I would have preferred Mirage be less comedic. That's the version I prefer. But he's a very fun, silly character. There are these little things you could quibble about, but did I find myself enjoying the film as a whole? Yes. There were only a few moments I found frustrating. Only a few moments I think they could have sped things up. For the most part, what the characters laid out and the plot laid out, they did a really, really good job. And even though I do like rap music and hip-hop music, that part of it I felt was a little overbearing. But it made sense because Bumblebee is about the 80s music. This is the 1990s music. So the soundtrack is skewed towards rap and hip-hop. They do a few other songs, and the score is really well done too. So I would have preferred the score dominate over the songs. Overall, it was balanced, again, for a young audience. But I've heard these songs like a million times as a rap fan, so I would have preferred them moderating that aspect, which sounds kind of weird. But as a person of color and hip-hop fan, I would have said, yeah, they could have toned that down a little bit and still had a very strong film. But that's a minor complaint. So a few minor complaints, but overall, very strong performances. Visual design, really impressive. I thought it would be a little fuzzy or murky. No, it looked pretty solid for the most part. The design of the characters could have been more creative, but that's about it. Sound design was excellent. You hear the dialogue very crisply, the sound effects. The only thing is you can't really make out the voice acting with the actors, but Peter Cullen sounds amazing. You can hear the dialogue very well. It doesn't feel like the Bay films where everything's like crunching on top of one another or the camera's moving way too fast. You can't keep track. For the most part, you know where things are, and you're able to track things fairly well. not just in terms of recent Transformers films, but in terms of just modern films, this stands out as pretty solid. It's way, way better than Super Mario Brothers. It's much stronger than Fast X. It's not a great film, but it is pretty good to great.